Hey there, YouTube friends. Thank you for wandering or possibly stumbling upon my YouTube video here about how to set up worship set lists in Ableton. If you found this video, that means you've probably looked up several others about how to do this and noticed that there are many ways in which you can set up sessions for your Sunday morning set list. And mine is no different, probably a little different than some of the others you've seen. And I think one of the beauties of Ableton and this new loop era we're in, or backing track era we're in, is that there's a lot of ways you can do it, and you kind of just have to swim your way through them and figure out which one works the best for you and your setup. And so hopefully some of the stuff I show you in this video will give you a good idea, or maybe some tools to use for your own set. So I'm going to start by walking you through what I do to prepare a loop to go, and also show you my session. So I'll start with my template. So when I play with a worship band, or I played with a worship band called the Andy Needham Band, and we did a lot of camps, conferences, Sunday mornings. So we're rolling into a lot of different places, a lot of different sets going on throughout the week. And so I created this show template up here that I open up whenever we roll into a venue, and this is what I work through to swap in and out songs. And I created a process that's pretty streamlined, pretty fast, but also has a lot of room to grow and to branch out. And so let me walk you through what I've got set up. Whenever I open this session, I make sure I hit the letter M, turn on my metronome up here just so I don't forget to do that later on. And I got a whole bunch of tracks. And one of the things that makes our setup, or my setup, unique, or a little different than what you might find at your church or some other larger artists' rigs, is that I bounce my backing tracks down to just a stereo left-right mix. Everything is on just a 2-track. That means drums, synths, lead lines, you name it, is all bounced down and mixed down to a stereo track. And that's good and bad, obviously. We have to do that just because we usually don't travel with a sound guy, and we don't have enough tracks on our board, open channels on our board, to split out drums or split out synths or whatever onto different tracks. And so I mix this down in whatever program I created the loop in. Usually I'll play it in the room in like a gymnasium or something, just so I can mix it according to a live kind of feel. And then I bounce it down and just have a stereo backing track right here. And the audio goes to my master out, which goes out 1 and 2. So I only have 3 outputs on my interface live. I use an MBox 2 Pro, and I have 3 outputs. I send out left, right on 1 and 2, which is my master backing track. And then on my 3rd output, I have cues, which is this audio track. And cues are the count-offs, the intro 2, 3, 4 kind of stuff. And you'll see that I send it external out, channel 3. Right now I'm using an Apollo, not my MBox 2, so that's not showing up as an output, but it goes out, put 3. Cue out is your metronome, whatever the click is being sent out. So that gets sent out with the cues on output 3. So that's what these 2 channels are. This channel right here is a rehearsal channel. Right now it's muted. I only unmute this when we're rehearsing, of course. And as I'll show you in a little bit, I create a backing track. After I've created my stereo backing track and created my loops, I create a bounce that has the cues printed on the backing track. And this allows me that in rehearsal, I just send them all out, 2 outputs, and I can start anywhere in the track and all the cues will line up. That will make more sense when I get to bouncing down this track for you as an example. Right here we have gang vocals. I split these out just so I can mix them in slightly different. There's only a few songs in which we actually have like gang vocals add to our sound. You'll notice that they still go out the master output 1 and 2, but they're slightly lower. I turn them down a little bit from the backing track. Here's Reason on a audio channel on a I use it as an input right here in the slave rewire mode. I do that for my MIDI keyboard, in which I play piano on sometimes, and I also have some organ patches that I'll use on a couple songs. But once again, that all goes out master 1 and 2, and I mix it right here, and I also have a volume control on my MIDI keyboard. So basically, the sound guy or whoever will tell me what volume to leave it at, and it'll just get mixed in with my backing tracks. So all going out 1 and 2. These two channels are MIDI channels that are for triggering lights. You can check out, I have a video in which I show you exactly what's going on those two channels. But for right now, we will skip over them. You can watch those other videos to learn. I have my SPD SX channel. This is, once again, I have my little sample pad that actually I use on this song and a couple others. You can check out some of my drum videos and how I use that. But once again, I just take the output of that sample pad. I put it into input 1, you'll see, audio input 1. And it just gets sent once again to the master, output 1 and 2, and I just mix it right here. So it gets blended in with the backing tracks and everything. Obviously, you can see there's some kind of pros and cons to this setup, in which a big con being these things are all mixed in the box, and I'm just using Ableton as a mixer in a way. And that kind of whatever I send the board or the sound guy is what he's got, and he's got to tell me to change stuff if he wants it. But that's what works for us, because we're rolling into places we need to be quick. We need stuff to be ready to go, and when we don't travel with the sound guy using the PreSonus, we just kind of recall our settings, do some tweaks here and there, but for the most part, it's kind of set it and forget it with this stuff. And so these are all levels that usually I can pull stuff up, and it works pretty well. Obviously, if we had a larger board and travel with the sound guy full time, I would try to split these things out. You know, send them the sample pad on a different channel, send them Reason on a different channel. But this is what we got to work with for now. And this last track is a bass track, bass audio track that we created for one gig in which our bass player couldn't make it. So he came over, we stayed up all night just tracking all his bass parts, and put them on another audio track that just got sent out with backing tracks on the master output here. And so for that one gig, we just had bass coming through the system programmed. So no bass player on the stage. Cool. And then we have our my scenes up here. Oh, this return track once again has to do with lights and triggering these through a program called DMXs. You can watch my other videos to learn about that. And then we have scenes, which are all labeled with the name of a worship song. And so you'll see each one contains the backing track and the cues and the lighting stuff or bass track for that song. And I'm going to dive into that by showing you how I set up one of these scenes. The one I have queued up right now is a song called Wake by Hillsong Young and Free. And this one in particular, I created in Reason by itself. Usually I'll use a couple programs, but this time I just used Reason. And you'll see here is my session in which I created my loop or my backing track. And there's things I would change here and there, but based off our setup. But for this example, I'm just going to assume that this track is the best thing I've ever heard, and it's perfect for what we need. I'll play a little sample of the chorus. Right up here, I have my click, which has my cues, my little count-offs, which, by the way, you can get these count-offs for free at loopcommunity.com under their resources page. Highly recommend it. I mean, it's free, so you can't lose. Yeah, and so here's right up to the chorus. Cool. Sounds awesome. I love it. Let's do it. Let's bounce this sucker down. So what I'm going to do after I create my backing track, everything's good to go. In Reason, you create your little loop start and end point. So I have the left one over here, and I got my right one at the very end of the song over here. And because I'm using Ableton right now, Ableton is open, Reason is in slave mode, which means that it relies on Ableton to control everything. So I can't actually bounce it in using Reason right now. I actually have to go to Ableton and say File, Export, Audio. But before I do this, I was getting ahead of myself here. So when I bounce this, I want a couple instances of this backing track. I want one with just the backing track and no cues inside of it. So I'm going to mute these cues so that I get a stereo bounce of the backing track, which is going to go on this audio track right here for Wake. And so I go here, I make sure that my cues are muted, go back to Ableton, export audio video. My loop is correct. I'm rendering the track from Reason. Wave 44.1, 16-bit, all sounds good to me. And I export it. I'm just going to throw it on the desktop, and I'm going to call it Wake Stereo Backing Track. There we go. Throw that on the desktop, save it. And then I go grab a cup of coffee, check my email while this is going. So I'm creating one audio track without the cues because that's what's going to go on this one. And then what we're going to do next is I'm going to create a bounce with only the cues, which is going to go in this audio track. And the reason for that is because the backing track needs to go out its own two outputs, 1 and 2, and the cues need to go out a separate output. If I bounced them together, that would be impossible unless I pan them hard left and right. But I want stereo backing tracks and not mono. So I need to do 2 different bounces. And I guess this is a good time to mention the rehearsal track. That's why I was saying I do have a rehearsal track in which I will do a third bounce of my backing track in which I leave the cues unmuted with the backing track, and so they're bounced all together in one stereo backing track. And that allows us in rehearsal, when I don't care if the cues are being sent through the house, I can start anywhere in the song and jump around with the cues still lining up. And you're going to see that I can't do that with what we're doing here when we're live. Awesome. So the backing track loop was just created. Now I'm going to create my export of the exact same length. It's very important that I don't change these loop points of my track. It's the exact same loop points. This time I'm going to solo my cues so that only my cues come out the system. And you'll notice that the backing track actually starts right here at bar, I think it's 4, at bar 3. But I still started it when I bounced my stereo backing track. I still started at the very start. So when we listen to the bounce I did with the backing track, there'll be silence for the first 2 bars. And that's because I'm planning on having the cues going there to count off the song. So I solo the click, go back to Ableton. I'm going to export Reason once again, exact same loop, exact same settings. Export, and this time it's going to be Wake, not stereo backing track, but cues. And yes, these cues are going to be stereo, but I don't care. They're just going to get some to mono, and it doesn't change the sound enough for me to care. Once again, I'll top off my coffee, check my Facebook, my Instagram, see what's going on Twitter. Check how the Bears are getting ready for this upcoming season. Should be a good one. Bounce my backing track. Everything sounds good. Go back to Ableton, and I do this. I create a new scene for my new song. So you go to Create, Insert Scene, Shortcut, Apple I. Always use shortcuts. Command I. Just create a new scene right down there, right after Lord I Need You. Click on this. You can either right click and hit rename, but once again, shortcut, Command R does the trick. And I'm going to name it Wake. And if you remember, it's always important to remember the BPM of your session. It is 131. So, because I did that, it didn't save. So Wake, it is 131 beats per minute, and it's in 4/4. Enter. Cool. So I got my scene. Now what I'm going to do is bring in my backing track and insert it into this clip. So I'll go to my Finder. I'll go to my desktop, and I will find my Wake stereo backing track right here. And I'm just going to drag this sucker right in there. You can see it loading right there. Now when I click on this, it actually turned out pretty well. You'll notice that when I click on it, though, there's one small issue. It is set to a warp point right here. And what you need to do to make sure that your song lines up perfectly with your cues, so I'm going to do the exact same thing with my cues. I'm going to drag them into my cue slot right here. And they're loading, they're loading, they're loading. Awesome. Now, I need to make sure that when I trigger this scene, that they both start at the exact same time, or else they won't line up. So I go to my cues, I'll start with them. I'm going to zoom in, got my little magnifying glass, zoom in, and you can see that when I dragged it in, it didn't start the audio file at the start of the session, or at the start of the clip. So I can grab my little warp marker here, I can drag it back, and I'm going to create a warp marker at the very beginning of it. Double clicking this one gets rid of that. I'm going to drag it and make sure it starts right at the start, and it didn't, so I zoom in even closer, do the exact same thing. That should get it close enough. So I got my warp marker, which in Ableton, you'll notice there's a little button here called warp. If I don't click this, it'll just have the audio file without any without it knowing what tempo the audio file is in. When you warp something, it confirms, it makes sure that your audio is lined up at the exact tempo that you bounced it at. And so, as you can see, Ableton tried to figure out what tempo it was at and failed. So I can click on this little box underneath warp. I type in 131, and beautiful, that is now the correct tempo. I'm going to do the exact same thing for my stereo backing track. Double click on it, zoom into the start, and once again it missed the intro. You can see that the black line, even silence, shows up, and then it actually starts right there. So I delete that warp mark, bring this one to the start, and it almost got it right, but not quite. So I click on the white, and it makes it 131, and that should be lined up completely with this. So now I have my stereo backing track and my cues. You'll notice, I don't know why this happens sometimes, but there are occasions in which you'll drag a backing track into Ableton, and it will create warp points all over the place. And I haven't figured out a shortcut, and maybe someone can point this out or an easy way to do it, but I just have to spend about 2 minutes clicking on every single warp point, getting rid of them all, deleting them, and then just creating the one at the very start of the session for when the song starts. So, because these are lined up completely, when I click Wake over here in my session view, and I hit enter, we should ideally hear the cues start and line up with the click at 131, and play the whole song correctly, following accordingly. For this instant, I'm going to send the cue out 1 and 2 just so you can hear it, because right now the Apollo is not set to receive audio from that output. So if I hit enter.
Intro 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Sounds pretty good to me. So what I would do when I first set up this song is the first time I do it, I listen to the track the entire way to make sure that it doesn't get screwed up at some point. Sometimes things will get a little wacky, in which like Ableton will put the endpoint like at the middle of your song, and all of a sudden halfway through the song it stops playing your backing track, but your cues keep going. So always double check that, make sure it's at the very end, so it doesn't sounds
Three
pretty good to
chorus.
me.
2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah. So the only as I was mentioning with the rehearsal track, the reason I have that is because one of the drawbacks of the system is if I wanted to start at the end of the song, at like the outro or whatever, if I were to click here and just start my backing track at the end, it would start the cues at the start of their audio, and it wouldn't match. It wouldn't lock up these clicks, as you'll hear here. Yep.
Intro. 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
So it's kind of messed up. Yeah, so that's why I have to create a rehearsal track that bounces them together so that I have a track when we're rehearsing, we can jump around in songs. And now that I have my Wake song queued up and I'm happy with it, we're going to be playing this song many times. So what I'll do is I'll create a nice little color coding for it. We'll do purple on this one. And I'll make this purple. That's a different shade of purple. 50 Shades of Purple. And so it's nice and color coded. I love it. And now over here in my little I don't know what you would call this file menu on the left hand side of Ableton, there's this thing called Places, and I've created a folder called Songs in which I save all my songs in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take Wake, I'm going to drag it into that folder. I already have Wake down here, but I'll just save it again. I'll hit enter, and now I can delete this and say I just rolled into a venue and Wake is on the set list for tonight. So I go to my little list here, I scroll down, find Wake, and I just drag it in, and boom, there it is. And we're also going to play This Is Amazing Grace, and I've done this in B flat. Just drag that in, and I'm just creating my set list. We'll do Salvations here. And this is what I do every time we roll into a venue, depending on the set list. So I hope that answers some of your questions and gives you a little bit of insight about, or gives you some tools to figure out what might work for you. So if you dig this video, please like it. Check out my other videos. Let me know if you have any questions. If you like that backing track, I highly encourage you to go check out loopcommunity.com, and you can do /Picha Power is my username, and you can actually buy that backing track that I use. With all those goodies, and I have a whole bunch of other ones. You can browse other backing tracks. They have tools. You can get those cues I was talking about. Awesome resource. These guys are really good guys over there, and they just want to help you out and equip you as best as possible to lead worship and to get things sounding really good at your church. So thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll catch you around.